So a pause, a truce, a ceasefire, call it what you will, as this is political semantics, has been negotiated between Israel and Hamas. However, this 4-day period, renewable hopefully if successful, aims first and foremost at securing tentative steps in the exchange of Israeli hostages with Palestinian detainees or prisoners. Part of me is happy that Qatar, with Egyptian and American support, managed to tailor this agreement. However, another part of me is quite sad because this swap could well have been implemented on the first day of the war, if only Israel had agreed to it. Alas, we are where we are today. And given that we are where we are today and that we hope and pray for a glimmer of light, let me draw the context by sharing with you some thoughts, bullet points like about a war that started with a reprehensible attack on Israeli civilians in settlements in the Gaza envelope and then fast graduated into a crippling war waged by Israel on 2+ million Gazans. Humanity at its best, isn't it? I start with one of the big elephants in the room. How can the USA and the European countries that have always prided themselves for adhering to the rule of law and to universal human rights accept, let alone justified, the untrammeled violence by Israel on Gaza, both north and south of the Wadi? I agree with commentators that our politicians in the West are showing double standards in their attitudes to Palestine when compared with Ukraine. But this platitude confirms a point that is familiar to some of us. As Lord Palmerston averred in the mid-19th century, the ship of state has interests, not friends. So don't be surprised that what the USA and its close allies say about Ukraine doesn't match with what it advocates for Palestine. And remember, neither did our words match our actions on Iraq 2 decades ago. And what is the interest of the West exactly? I point to 3 headings, though there are many more. The UK was the midwife that delivered Israel in Palestine. And so there is an umbilical cord here that secures the interest of British and Western policies in the Levant. And that interest includes hemming in Iran, plus its proxies in Lebanon, Yemen, Syria, and Iraq, as well as obstructing the resurgence of an ISIL-like militant or radical Islamic movement. In this project, the West does not necessarily approve of the religious colonial settlers and their fascist cabinet ministers in Israel, or those who spew out the most hateful statements against Palestinians, but it puts up with them both for the larger good as it sees it and for personal benefit, such as in the case of Prime Minister Netanyahu and his political prospects, let alone legal problems. Interests, remember, not friendships. But let me now zoom in on the theater of war. The USA have nailed their colors to the mast, and that is Israel. In fact, I wonder at times if Israel is the tail that wags the dog. President Biden is beholden to Prime Minister Netanyahu, and the trickle of humanitarian aid that America has been pushing for in Gaza is infinitesimal compared to the flood of weapons coming to Israel and aiding its war efforts. Perhaps the 4-day truce might alter these dynamics, but no amount of verbal recriminations by Arab countries or even the global South will altogether alter this strategic choice. The USA, and less importantly, parts of Europe, are allies of Israel and therefore are inimical with Palestinian interests. And this will continue in one format or another until Israel does as much damage as possible to Gaza in an attempt to eradicate the Hamas structures. And the West will give Israel the green light, even at the risk of carpet bombing a whole population and its structures, since many Western tacticians think that this will disrupt the so-called axis of resistance, weaken Iran, and lubricate the wheels of further normalization with Israel. Read here, Saudi Arabia. Interests, dear viewers, remember, not friendships. In webinars and public statements, I hear participants wondering if the war will expand beyond the 141 square miles of Gaza. Where to exactly, and how? Well, to the Palestinian West Bank first, where settler violence and mayhem are mounting daily, and then also to southern Lebanon and possibly to the broader region. And who knows, with the small armada of Western, largely US warships in the southern Mediterranean and the skirmishes between the USA and militant groups in Syria and Iraq, it could even go further, although I really don't think that even interests, not friendships, would allow it at this brazen level. So at this moment, nothing is yet clear, but I fear recklessness, or the law of unintended consequences, or even sheer happenstance that might see the region sleepwalk into a wilder conflagration. I hope not, and I probably think not, but the next 2 weeks might give us a better indication of the levels of recklessness or bravado or arrogance. Meanwhile, Israeli settlers protected by the Israeli army are rampaging with total impunity across the West Bank. In dribs and drabs, these attacks are killing, maiming, and threatening Palestinians in their homes, offices, lands, or orchards, from Jenin, Nablus, and Tulkarem all the way to Bethlehem and Hebron via Jerusalem. And guess what? They're even invading the Armenian quarter in the old city of East Jerusalem these days. Ah, the joys of the only democracy in the Middle East, where anyone who is not Jewish is just a number whose rights are to be circumcised and circumscribed, and whose freedoms of expression or movement are frowned upon, often violently. Moreover, using labels such as self-defense or the rules-based international order as two interchangeable, albeit disposable fig leaves, the Israeli establishment, though not necessarily the whole population, will try to continue its assault on the whole of Gaza, and its spokespersons will appear on news channels in Israel and elsewhere to intimate that this war is being waged by Israel not for vengeance, but wait for it, for the sake of Palestinians. Meanwhile, according to the Euromed Human Rights Monitor of 24th November, the civilian body count in Gaza goes to over 20,000, with 8,000 children and 4,000 plus women killed, some of their corpses still under the rubble. Meanwhile, half the strip is razed, and Israel has displaced 1.6 to 1.7 million Gaza residents, many of them from north to south, who are exposed, as you well know, to the wintry elements. Is it any wonder that such actions provoke memories of a second Nakba, a population transfer? Yet Palestinians, or anybody else for that matter, is disallowed from using terms like genocide, ethnic cleansing, or war crimes, because what Israel is doing in Gaza is meant to secure peace for the future and wash away any animosity, hatred, or iniquity. Wow, political theology in the making. And it's nothing new, as we've applauded it in the past, only to rue the consequences later. A final bullet point thought that worries me a tad more than others, perhaps. I'm becoming increasingly convinced that a majority of the Israeli political establishment, supported, if not egged on, by the religious, colonial, and trigger-happy settlers across the West Bank, want to rid Palestinians from Gaza and also from much of the West Bank. This is not really a new ideology, but incremental steps being taken by successive governments, at the very least since the assassination of Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin and the criminal and apartheid-like policies of the government, coupled with the odious agendas of the likes of Ben Gvir and Smotrich, that point clearly to this reality. It is no longer possible for us in the West to airbrush these actions and pretend that Israel is a democracy that fights for its survival in a cesspool of autocracy. So am I sad and worried? Yes. I become desperately sad and worried when politicians willfully discard rational thinking and give in to primal instincts in order to dehumanize the other. I get sad and worried when our politicians argue forcefully that it's the mountains ahead to climb that are wearing them down, rather than admitting that it is the pebble in their own shoes, to quote Muhammad Ali. Alas, something is broken in our world, and if we do not recognize it, we cannot move forward either. Will you all, individuals, institutions, churches, think tanks, journalists in the West, acknowledge this fact and desist from weak-kneed responses? Or will you remain silent, or at best pussyfoot around the issue? You have to answer this critical question, and not to me, but to your own consciences and eventually to history. Mea culpa, mea culpa, mea maxima culpa.